Well, it would seem that Volodymyr Zelensky himself is now signaling that we may be reaching the end stages of the war in Ukraine, and that it will result in a Russian victory. Now, he didn't say this directly, but what he did say is that Ukraine likely would have to compromise with Russia, i.e., surrender, if Bakhmut finally falls, which the Ruskies have been trying to take Bakhmut for what feels like a year. The Ukrainians seem to have taken an attitude towards Bakhmut in particular of winning there at all costs. I never really quite understood it. I don't understand why that's the hill they want to die on. We know that the U.S.'s official numbers that they've leaked into the American press is that at least 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed over the last year in the war. And I would venture to guess that tens of thousands of them have died in Bakhmut, because it's the stories that we've been hearing for months and months is that city's basically a meat grinder, and that Zelensky just keeps shoveling in more and more untrained conscripts to get slaughtered by primarily the Wagner group, which is sort of like the Russian equivalent of Blackwater, which Blackwater doesn't even exist anymore, but you get the point. Zelensky also said that without direct American support, Ukraine would just lose outright. He's correct about that. Ukraine has been living off of just American money for most of the past year. Ukraine would have ceased to exist as a country a long time ago had it not been for the U.S. just pouring money into that country. And Zelensky is, of course, saying that Ukraine needs even more money, even more weapons, even more money laundering, if they are to continue to even put up a fight. Now, part of this could just be Zelensky trying to extract more money from the West, as is his MO, but he is sounding pretty dire here. I mean, you have to balance trying to make the situation sound bad so that the West sends you more money, and just being a total doomer as the leader of your country, and making your own population think that the end is nigh and that there's nothing we can do about it, and that we all should just give up because that's what's going to end up happening anyway. So why continue to fight and die? You know, if my son dies in the next, a month or so, and then Zelensky ends up surrendering to Putin, flying to Moscow, kissing Putin's ring, begging him for forgiveness, what did my son die for? Why not just deny it? Why not just surrender at this point? That is something that Zelensky has to worry about. So it will be interesting. I don't know. He didn't elaborate as far as anything that I saw, translated in the press. He didn't elaborate on what he meant by compromise. But to me, that would mean, at the very least, you surrender the Donbass to the Ruskies, although I don't think the Ruskies would be nearly satisfied with that at this point. The Ruskies are going to take a lot more than that, especially since everything that Zelensky is saying publicly is conveying an image of weakness, and that he's essentially saying, if Bakhmut falls, we're done. Well, if I'm Putin and I hear that, and then, we finally do break through and take Bakhmut, well, then I would say, well, gee, let's keep going, because according to Zelensky, there's nothing but flesh behind Bakhmut. That's their last line of defense. And, if that falls, then we can march our way all the way to Kiev. If Bakhmut falls tonight, well, then Putin himself could be eating chicken Kiev at some cafe overlooking the Dnieper by April Fool's Day. That is the impression that Zelensky is giving. Now, do I know that that's in fact the case? No. Like I said, he has somewhat of an incentive to make the situation seem more dire so that the West feels more compelled to send arms sooner rather than later. But we're a far cry from the old propaganda narrative, which was never true, that the Ruskies were on the run and that the Ukrainians were walloping them. Nobody's saying that now. Nobody's acting like Ukraine is winning, and nothing has really changed. It's been a stalemate. And, you know, a few months ago, when everyone, you know, who in the West, who's an intelligent person, was saying, oh, Ukraine's winning, the Ruskies look so stupid, you know, obviously we should back the winners. Nothing materially has really changed on the ground in Ukraine, and yet now everyone just kind of realizes, yeah, they're not winning. You know, it's almost like they never were winning, which they weren't. The Ruskies have had their feet planted firmly on Ukrainian soil since the beginning of the war, and the Ukrainians have just been trying to stop the advancement, stop the onslaught. And they've been doing this by just throwing an seemingly unlimited supply of human resources at the Russian guns and launching a seemingly unlimited amount of American ordnance and not to mention German and Polish ordnance at the Ruskies. And we know that Zelensky back in was it March or April of 2022, almost made peace with Putin. They came, you know, they'd gone to the negotiating table and they'd hammered out a peace agreement. And it was the West who strong-armed Zelensky into refusing that peace agreement, backing out at the 11th hour, and continuing the war now for another year. And things have only gotten worse. Ukraine does not have much of a negotiating position now. Back then, perhaps, they would have gotten away with just, you know, recognizing Russian sovereignty over Crimea and then establishing, you know, essentially self-government for the Donbass. But no, at this point, I think that the Ruskies are as committed as ever to wiping the Maidan regime off the face of the earth. Now, the principal disagreement at the moment is that the West supposedly wants Ukraine to pull out of Bakhmut and, you know, live to fight another day. Stop hemorrhaging, you know, thousands and thousands of soldiers over this one city. But the Ukrainians have essentially asserted the sunk cost fallacy and said, you know, we've lost too much here, and if we pull out now, you know, we don't have the manpower, even if we had the resources, you know, militarily, even if we had all of the weapons and munitions, we don't have the manpower to try and retake this city later. And that is Ukraine recognizing that once they lose a town to the Ruskies, you know, there are no more counteroffensives left. That's not happening. Towns fall to the Russians now. Now, early on, this was not the case. Towns were changing hands, and you know, there were bad things that happened to people who collaborated with the Ruskies, and by collaborating, I mean ate Russian food. Food that the Russians handed out to them. That, you know, doing even that little got you labeled a collaborator with the Russian occupiers, and you know, led to very serious consequences. I forget what the law is. I think it was at least 20 years in prison was like the minimum sentence for eating Russian food. Anyway, what we're hearing at this point is that, you know, the Ukraine is essentially saying, no, we can't retake these cities once they fall. And if that's the case, then based on what they're saying, once Bakhmut is gone, we're going to see perhaps not a true domino effect in that it'll happen rapidly, but, you know, slowly but surely, more towns will start to fall, and they will never go back to being in Ukrainian hands. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.